Hello and welcome. This presentation supplements your textbook material on using decision matrices. There are two reasons you would use a decision matrix. One is for evaluation. You use a matrix to weigh alternatives using criteria. The second is for communication purposes when you are implementing recommendations. And this links to the concepts of consideration and procedural justice discussed in the reading What You Don't Know About Making Decisions. By using a decision matrix to communicate your decisions, you demonstrate to stakeholders that you came to this conclusion in a fair and objective way, thus increasing the sense of procedural justice and the likelihood of acceptance. This presentation provides 5 tips for using a matrix. The first is to avoid the halo effect and the contrast effect. Evaluate by criterion, not by idea. If you work horizontally across your matrix, assessing alternative 1 first against all criteria, then alternative 2 against all criteria, then alternative 3, you risk coming to conclusions about which alternative should be the winning option, and thus, without meaning to, unfairly weighting your results. By working vertically, you increase the likelihood of objectively weighing each option against each criterion. 2. In the first run-through, use your matrix to assess your criteria. As discussed in the presentation on decision criteria, if as you're using your matrix, something doesn't feel right to you, stop and reassess. Look at what the matrix suggests and ask yourself, does this represent our thinking? To reiterate a point from the criteria presentation, this does not mean that you want to fiddle with your matrix indefinitely, since your goal is not to get it to tell you what you want to hear. The point here is that you should use the matrix to assess your criteria only until you get it to the point where you are confident your criteria are valid. 3. Compare like ideas and use multiple matrices as needed. Here's an example to demonstrate what I mean. A former learner group was tasked with recommending a new direction to the executive director of a Victoria area neighborhood group, the Fernwood Neighborhood Resource Group. The goal was to increase vibrancy in Fernwood while generating revenue. One learner team generated 3 options. 1. Create a supper club for senior citizens. 2. Make Fernwood into Victoria's gay village. 3. Host a Sunday farmers market in Fernwood. The challenge with throwing all of these ideas into a matrix would be that they are too dissimilar to be compared. One's an activity, the other is a whole neighborhood strategy, the other is an event. It would thus make more sense to first decide whether you believe the way to go would be to work on an activity, a neighborhood strategy, or an event. If you then decided to work on a neighborhood strategy, you could then weigh like alternatives. For example, should Fernwood be the next gay village, the best place in Victoria for seniors, or the best place for young families? Once you decided on the overall strategy, you might consider tactics for achieving it. At this point, you'd be reasonable to ask, isn't this all excessively left-brained? And I want to acknowledge that the example I just gave, where I used 3 decision matrices, overstates the point. In the course of any problem-solving process, you will be making hundreds of micro decisions along the way. You cannot, nor would you want to, stop and use a decision matrix at every point. That said, you should be making decisions with at least some articulation of what your criteria are. The key point here is that you should not be throwing unlike alternatives into a matrix. When you use a decision matrix, you want to make sure you are comparing apples and apples, not apples and oranges. Put another way, you want to put items in your matrix that are at the same point on the tactical strategic spectrum. You don't want to be comparing tactical ideas like a supper club with strategic ones like making a neighborhood attractive to the gay community. 4. Consider what evaluation system works best. You want to consider whether you will use a numerical rating, for example, giving each alternative a score to 1 to 10 against each criterion, or whether you want to use an alternative system such as plus, minus, and neutral, or something graphical like the example on the slide. The advantage of using numbers is their specificity. But this is also their disadvantage, since often you are dealing in estimates and the numbers could give a false sense of precision. For example, if you were to weigh two alternatives and one got a final score of 67 out of a possible 100 points and the other got a 70, you'd have to ask whether those 3 points were truly meaningful. If you are not using precise data in scoring each alternative, and we usually aren't in situations that involve uncertainty, are you really able to say that an alternative that, quote, wins by 3 percentage points is superior? If you use numbers, you want to make sure you interrogate your results. Finally, don't rule out options that are not sufficiently developed. This is particularly important when dealing with creative solutions. If you have a creative alternative in your matrix, it will frequently appear less feasible than one that is tried and true. So you do not want to put something undeveloped in there in a way that would predetermine that it will get ruled out. You want to use your PPCO process before coming to the matrix to ensure that all options have a fair shot. In conclusion, to avoid the halo effect and the contrast effect, evaluate by criterion, not by idea. In other words, work vertically down the decision matrix, not horizontally. In the first run through, use your matrix to assess your criteria. Compare like ideas and use multiple matrices as needed. 4. Consider what evaluation system works best. And 5. Don't rule out options that are not sufficiently developed. Thank you, and please ask any questions you might have.